Paying attention to the pursuit of play, humor, and laughter doesn't mean that you're a selfish, frivolous person. It's a way of communicating that you care enough about yourself, your family, your friends, and your work to make sure that you're as strong, resilient, and effective as possible. Healthy relationships and healthy people have a foundation of humor. In order to strengthen your foundation, we're going to take you all the way back to your first humor experience. You'll learn how to create a humor inventory, which will allow you to choose which experiences you want to cherish and which you want to forgive and forget. And you'll learn how to differentiate between positive and negative humor, because that's no laughing matter.
Here we go. We're going to launch into a whole series of sets of information. The first has to do with your first humor experience. Now, your first humor experience in human life takes place, to the best of our knowledge, at about 6 to 8 weeks of life. A lot of you have had children, you've dealt with babies, and you want the child to grow up to be rational and intelligent, so you're holding the child and you're going, waka, 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 waka. Wee, hey, waha, hey. Wah, 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 wah. And all of a sudden, at about 6 to 8 weeks, the baby smiles. There's a place in baby books, baby's first smile. You know, baby's first laugh. We call grandma, tell the baby smile. God forbid your friend should say, it's just gas. It's all that, just gas. It's not just gas. Although it might be. And gas can make you smile or laugh at any age. But, well, it has other responses as well, I'm aware of that. But the point is, it starts that early. And at 10 to 12 weeks, infants are laughing. It's remarkable. Now, every time I say this, people say, well, it wasn't my kid did that. Well, most children by the age of 3 or 4, raised in a relatively healthy environment, even one that is difficult, the child, if it has been taught to smile and laugh, and we have to be taught, and I'll explain that in a moment. Most children by the age of 3 or 4 are laughing every 4 or 5 minutes. That's something. And somewhere along the way, that starts to get diminished as we get older and older. Around 7, we encourage laughter in kids up to about 7, and then we say, okay, that's enough. Cut the funny stuff, get a job, start bringing in some money. We're having trouble. But I want you to think about it, because it was one of the most interesting studies we came across. What happens is this. You've got that child and you establish that smiling, laughing bond. A man by the name of Rene Spitz, and anybody who's been through nursing school has come across Rene's studies. Rene Spitz began studies earlier in the century, and he did studies with children in orphanages. And what he discovered was quite astonishing. He discovered that the smiling, laughing bond is a trained response. And that if children are not trained in that response before the age of 11 months, they never develop into normal functioning adults. Never. No exceptions. Those studies have been investigated and replicated as recently as a few years ago in Denmark. His studies of children in orphanages were interesting because the children in the orphanages were better cared for in terms of health care and environment and medical care and food than the children outside the orphanage. But there was one caretaker for about every 8 infants. Anybody who's dealt with children knows this. By the time you have changed and fed 8 infants, it's time to start on number 1 again. You have very little time to do anything except change and feed the infants. But that smiling, laughing bond was not established. And these children were showing signs of mature adult depression by the age of 3. By the age of 5, a substantial number of them had developed adult schizophrenic patterns. And as they progressed in life, they never, no exceptions, never developed into normal functioning adults. They became unattached or detached people who found it impossible to establish bonds with others and were subject to a wide variety of illnesses, both mental and physical. Now, if you have trouble with human relationships, that doesn't mean you didn't learn to smile and laugh as a child. Everybody has trouble with human relationships. It's a different thing to be totally unattached and incapable of understanding or bonding with another human being. It's a very powerful force. Nobody knows why that happens. But we do know that if children don't learn, that laughing, smiling bond is not established. It has a profound effect on the rest of their development throughout their lives. Think of this. In the study of communication, laughter and smiling is the first interactive form of human communication. In the study of communication, we have what we call, up until that time, bypass communication. The baby cries, I feed it. The baby cries, I change it. The baby cries, I cry. Maybe that's interactive, I don't know. But the point is, for the first time in human life, we have like communication. I smile at the baby smiles at me. The baby laughs, I laugh. And think of all the trouble we go through, intuitively, to make babies laugh. The most distinguished, terminally professional grandfather, first exposed to a new grandchild, will make an utter idiot of himself. Making faces, blowing bubbles, jumping up and down. When my daughter was very small, I would go to the market shopping, and she would be laying in the upper part of the basket, and I'd be picking out tomatoes, and I'd turn around, and some adult that I'd never seen, that didn't know me, that didn't know her, would be standing over the basket going, and if you saw them, they go, I just, I was trying to make the baby laugh. It's just, we'll go to almost any lengths. You know, some Native American tribes consider the human spirit unborn until an infant smiles. That the full human spirit has not been released into this world until the infant learns to smile and laugh. And they have what's called a laughing baby ceremony to celebrate that, which is something I think we could all do well to adopt. They have a ceremony. All the friends and family come in, and for 2 days sometimes, the baby is passed around. Everybody smiles and laughs with the baby. End of 2 days, the babies are like, ha, ha, ha. Is it over yet? But the adults all get to reaffirm the value of that communication and of that capacity. It is a profound act of human bonding and trust. And it is as much an element of communication and bonding in adult life as it is in infancy. Think about that for a moment. Do you not communicate more effectively with people that you share some humor bond with? Do you not bond and team build and connect with people that you share some humor bond with? I mean, you don't get up in the morning and call the people who bum you out, do you? Say, well, I'd like to feel bad today. No, you seek out, unless you have a problem with dysthymia, which we'll discuss later, you seek out the people who elevate and support your sense of joy in being alive, although some of us learn to seek out the others. And it's an important thing to understand that without that smiling, laughing experience of humor bonding, human life does not develop as we know it. It's not an incidental aspect of human development. And it's a vital aspect of human loving. I want you to do a humor inventory. A humor inventory means going back through your life and looking at the times in your life when most people are influenced to either expand or contract in their humor experience. Now, there's not much you can do about early childhood. You know, you can't remember probably when you were 6 to 8 weeks old and somebody did an impression of a rutabaga and you thought it was hysterical or something. But the truth of the matter is, you wouldn't be sitting in this room today as an adult if you had not had a laughing bonding experience of some kind as an infant. You wouldn't be here. The place you can really start to do an inventory is in grade school. See, what happens real early on is we get humor and aggression mixed up. What I want you to do with this inventory is I want you to try and sit down with a piece of paper and write down what happened during that period of your life. What do you remember about what you learned about humor? Because if these skills are going to fit together and work for you, you've got to take a little time to do an inventory. In early childhood, you start to learn how to walk and you get real intrigued with the world, and you see the cat laying on the floor. And you go over to the cat and you stomp on the cat's tail. And the cat goes, "Meow," and runs out of the room, and you go, "Ah." And we think, how cruel. No, it's not a matter of cruelty. It's just that kids are really intrigued with the fact that they have some effect on the world. Look at that. I did this and something happened. That's funny. It's amusing. But the parent comes along and says, no. The parent doesn't say, no, don't hurt the kitty. Okay to laugh. Because the kid probably wouldn't understand that. So very early on, humor and aggression get confused in our minds, and it's a problem for the rest of human life. In grade school, you can really start to do your inventory, because if you're the kind of person who has been teased for any reason, especially when you were a child, about anything, it may have shaped all of your attitudes about humor. What do? You just write down what happened, how it affected you, and how it left you feeling, and then whether or not you want to keep thinking that way. I was teased for a lot of reasons. When I was 10, I entered puberty like a truck through a plate glass window. I woke up one morning covered in body hair, with this huge, deep voice, and I'm this little scrawny kid, talking like a linebacker. And I had so much hair on my body, another of God's jokes. Well, I'm going to take it off his head. I might as well put it on his body. I was terrified to go to gym because my nickname was Wolfie, or Dog Boy. Now, I can look back on it and see some humor, but boy, at the time, it wasn't very funny. It hurt. It got to the point where, as an adult, if I walked into the room and heard people making jokes or heard people laughing, I presumed somebody was being hurt. And that may have been the experience for you that shaped your reactions to humor. I want you to look at it. Then there's junior high school. I talked about earlier, we're dealing with all those issues of acceptance, trying to fit in. And maybe in junior high school, you tried to tell a joke, and you got to the punchline. And then she ate his socks. And people are looking at you like, what a nerd. What a worm, man. And you think to yourself, God, I promise I will never do that again as long as I live. Look at what happened, both positive and negative, around humor in junior high school. That's usually when kids start developing what we call black market humor, to sort of offend you as an adult and set themselves apart. Really gross jokes, okay? And then there's high school and the onset of what I call terminal cool. You know terminal cool, you've seen it. And you say, listen to me. And they say something like, I got an ear on this side, go for it. And you're like, ah. Why is it that when young people begin to imitate adults, the first imitation process they go through is cool, removed, distant, unaffected, unemotional? Where'd they learn that? I'm sorry, we can't blame TV for everything. You know, we make adulthood such an unappealing destination, I'm surprised anybody wants to grow up sometimes. And some of us don't, okay. So it may have been in high school that was set up. It may have been your career, where you decided you had to get serious or you weren't going to make it. It may have been dating and marriage that did it. You know, where men use humor as a sort of seduction, impress you with how clever and witty they are and how funny they are and maybe how much fun you're going to have, and then you get married and they go, okay, that's over. Now you're going to find out what I'm really like, okay? It may have to do with parenthood. Having your first child can be either a very humorous or a very terrifying experience, especially that first child, because all of a sudden you've got to be guru, guide, and guard. Don't eat the cat food. No, don't stick the hairpin in the outlet. Don't run into the street naked. I mean, don't run into the street at all, and keep your clothes on, and you end up at the end of the day going, no. That's why I say it's very important during parenthood to give the child humor, yes, experiences, where you get down on the floor for no reason at all and you play with the kid, and you do silly things. You let them know as they are growing up, before they become teenagers, that it's okay to feel good and have a good time and enjoy yourself. Or it may be in the middle years, which for me changes now every year. But those years where we are supposedly the most productive in our work life, where we're too busy to have fun, too busy to have a good time. Very entertaining, Mr. Metcalf, very interesting and all that sort of thing, but I'll tell you what, things are real serious around here and we've got to get things done. I've got to get some money put away if the kids go to college. I've got to take care of these medical problems I'm having. I'm working in this company where things are falling apart at the seams and I just can't take time off right now. I don't know, maybe next weekend, maybe on my vacation, maybe when I retire, maybe when I die, but I just don't have time right now, okay? Leave me alone. Too busy. And then we wonder why it is we burn out at 45. We wonder why it is that we start having health problems when we're supposed to be the healthiest generation that the face of the nation has ever seen. And we're having health problems unlike any we've ever known. Or maybe it's the elder years, and you don't have to be there yet to think about it. What do you want to be when you get there? What do you want it to be like? Because in our elder years, we are very often too lonely to enjoy ourselves. And this culture certainly encourages that, and it's one of the very difficult issues that we're facing now as our country gets older. You know, it's amazing how as the baby boomers are starting to age, all of a sudden there's all this interest in aging. Because all of us who thought we were going to be young forever are suddenly getting glasses and going, oh my God, look at those lines. Where did those come from? I want you to sit down and look at those aspects of your existence and simply write down the positive and negative experiences around humor during those periods of time. Because I want you to be able to make a choice. I want you to be able to choose to either stay with the things you've been given about humor or to change. And you can't do that until you understand what you've got in stock. In a study done by the American Psychology Association, over 300 couples were surveyed who had been married 20 to 45 years. And these were people who identified their marriages as happy, warm, loving, supporting. And they asked these people, they separated the men and women and said, list the most important elements of a happy, ongoing, nurturing marriage. And number one on both lists, 97% of the time, was my spouse is my best friend. Number two might be I respect my spouse for the person they are. There was very little differentiation. Number 7 on the women's list and 8th on the men's list out of 36 elements was we laugh and play together a lot. It came in several places ahead of we have a positive sex life. Now, I don't want to get into talking about sex lives, but I saw that and I thought, there are all these sex therapists running around telling us that if you want to have a happy marriage, like Dr. Ruth. Do you get Dr. Ruth here? Dr. Ruth, who says these amazing things on the radio that people hear. Things like, if your sex life is boring in a marriage, you should do something unusual, make love on the roof. It'll terrify the neighbors, but it'll enliven your marriage, Don't do it. It gives you terrible asphalt burns. It's not good. But the idea is that we have all these sex therapists. Where are the humor and laughter therapists? I took this thing to my wife. I said, what do you think of this? These people in these long-term happy marriages think laughter and playing together is actually more important than a positive sex life. She's so subtle. She said, of course, you idiot, she said. Think about it. You're not going to have a very positive, loving, warm, intimate relationship with somebody that you don't have fun with, that you don't laugh and play with. Of course. I said, so that means that we have a good marriage if when I get undressed at night, you laugh. Is that right? Is that what you're telling me? You go into hysterics. We had a long discussion about that. Let me just point out a couple of the basic factors about positive and negative humor. And it's a very thin line. Essentially, positive humor is that kind of humor which is bonding. It draws us together and allows us to see a common foe or a common problem in a new perspective. Negative humor separates people. Its purpose and intention is to make you different than me, you less than me better than you. Positive humor is essentially victimless, whereas negative humor depends entirely upon a victim orientation for its effect. And people say, well, there is no such thing as a victimless joke or victimless humor. Sure there is. And let me use racist and sexist humor as an example of the difference between positive and negative humor. I have a friend who is Sicilian. That's not Italian, as many of you know. That's Sicilian. And my Sicilian friend and I make a lot of jokes at one another's expense. He jokes about my being bald. He jokes about my being Irish. He jokes about what I do for a living. This is a man with that beautiful dark olive skin and more hair than anybody deserves to have. And he's built like a tank. He's got the kind of body, very intimidating. You can see the muscles through the fabric of his clothing, And he can wear color. See, people of color can wear color. The man can wear pink and green and orange and white and yellow all together, and on him it looks good. And I'll make jokes, about the color of his clothing and all of that. But Carl and I have a consenting adult humor relationship. And that's the difference. The difference is we have talked about what are the limits. And we have a right, if one of us steps over that limit, to say, that's not funny. I'm sorry, I can't handle that. I'd rather you didn't make jokes about that, and we respect that. The difference is a consenting adult humor relationship, and that makes all the difference in the world. One of the worst habits that white people have very often upon meeting people of other races, especially I saw this a lot between whites and blacks, they don't know this black person at all, and they start making all of these bad news, down-home jokes about black people, as though this is some great way of bonding, like, see how hip and cool I am? I can tell these stories just like Eddie Murphy. It's a great way to apply for plastic surgery is what it is. The idea that you think you're going to bond with someone by telling these jokes and they're supposed to find them funny when the two of you hardly even know each other is absolutely mad. I am not going to say that you should never tell another Polish joke or another racist joke of any kind, because there are elements of that kind of humor that are tension relieving, that allow us to let go of some tension, and if we share them with one another, to maybe come a little bit further along in terms of understanding one another. But the primary difference is motive. The problem with most racist humor and most racist jokes is, in my mind, and understand I have my own prejudices, it is, in my mind, the difference between a desire to understand and a desire to bond and a desire to get past discomfort, and, on the other hand, a desire to separate, make myself better than, or degrade. It's real simple when it comes down to that. And then there's emergency room humor. It's like cops have a kind of humor that if you're not a cop, and you haven't had to scrape people off the pavement, and you haven't had to deal with a gun stuck up in your ear, if you heard the kind of jokes that some cops tell, you'd think they were the most horrible, unthinking, unfeeling people you'd ever met. But I guarantee you, if you lived that lifestyle for a while, you'd find yourself making those jokes. It's the only way we can release tension. One of the first studies done on laughter, in 1939, the scientists wanted to find out, why do people laugh? What evolutionary purpose does it serve? Okay? I love science, don't you? Yes, we're having a good time, but why? Let's find out. So they did a variety of studies, and these studies came to the conclusion that the only evolutionary purpose laughter serves is to relieve stress. It's one of the ways we gain control, by making light of horrific, horrible things. It's one of the ways we keep it in perspective. And the thing about emergency room humor is you just have to be real careful about the fallout. You have to be very careful that you don't share that kind of humor with people who don't understand it. It's all built around those forbiddens that I mentioned to you earlier. You know what the forbiddens are. They're all the things that you have learned in the course of your life aren't funny, and you better not laugh at them. They're not funny. For instance, gas is not funny. It's not funny, see? Now, some people, all you have to do is mention that word, and they go, other people are going, well, that's disgusting. I hope he doesn't keep talking about that. Neither one of those attitudes is right or wrong. It's all a matter of training. Forbiddens are all those things we have individually learned in our families and our culture and society and upbringing are right or wrong to laugh about. Somebody may tell jokes that you find gross and disgusting. You have a perfect right to take that person aside and say, you know, I really would appreciate it if you wouldn't tell those jokes around me. I mean, it's not your problem, you know, if you want to be gross and disgusting. But, no, the idea is you don't identify their problem, you identify yours. But that doesn't mean that you have to then assess that that person is entirely an idiot and a disgusting human being. All it means is they learned different forbiddens than you did. That's all it means. I mean, they may be a disgusting human being, but you can't make that judgment and assessment based on those learned differences. Laughter and humor are an intimate part of human loving and our capacity to love and care for one another. It's one of the greatest gifts we can give one another.
Taking ourselves lightly and our problems seriously requires discipline. Why do we choose to take everything so seriously that we often beat ourselves up? There are two reasons. Number one, it's instinctive, and number two, we want control. That's why it's so tough when we don't feel very good and things don't seem very funny. We feel like we've lost control. It's important to realize that there's nothing wrong with you if you feel bad. So on this side, you'll learn what can cause the absence of humor, as well as what you can do to handle it.
It is impossible to talk about the presence of humor without talking about the absence of humor. Now, understand something, if you haven't figured it out by now. I am not a physician. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a psychologist. I am an ex-game management and theater major, okay? Keep that in mind as I share this information. We have drawn this information from a lot of very reliable sources, and I can only share with you what other experts in the field have to say. It's very important you understand the absence of humor. There are people here today who are not feeling good. And it may not be a consistent experience. It may sort of come and go through the day. For a variety of reasons, we learn to live scared, and a lot of bad things happen to us in our lives, many of us. But a lot of people get up in the morning and they say, I'm depressed. Do not use that word lightly. Depression is a disease. Certain forms of depression, and in my mind, what genuine depression is, there's despair and there's system depression, but there is a growing body of proof that indicates that many depressions are biochemical brain disorders, that for reasons still unknown, a malfunction of the brain chemistry takes place, partially genetic, but not necessarily genetically loaded, happens to 6 to 8% of the world population. 6 to 8% will become biochemically brain disorder depressed. Saying to someone, come on, snap out of it, is like coming up to me and saying, come on, grow hair. Go ahead. Get tall. Trying to cheer up a depressed person is one of the worst things you can do, because they already know inside something's wrong. They want to feel good. They know there's something wrong with their inability to feel good, but the harder they try it, sometimes the worse it gets. It's a very complex and sometimes medical issue. So I don't want you to use the word depressed lightly. I want to give you a list of common absence experiences of humor, so that when you're feeling bad, you can look at it and say, well, that's what this is, and each one of these has a specific solution. First of all, there's the blahs, bad days. Everybody has bad days. Nobody knows why. I asked my grandmother once, how come you're being so nasty? She said, people have bad days, so they'll appreciate the good ones. Now shut up and leave me alone. Okay, you bet. That's probably as good a description as any. No one really knows why we have bad days, but we do. And if you look at it, it doesn't seem to be attached to anything. You're just feeling sort of, foul. Astrology evolved to try and explain bad days. The ancients saw the stars moving, felt movement changes in themselves, tried to correlate the two. There are all kinds of attempts. The important thing to understand about bad days, you've been feeling grumpy during the day and you look at it and you've got this list and you don't know exactly why, and it doesn't seem to be any of these other things. Maybe it's just a bad day. You got up on, quote unquote, the wrong side of the bed. Have you ever figured out which side that is? You can get into a real hassle laying in bed going, which side's the wrong side, honey? Getting off on the wrong foot. We have all kinds of phrases for it. But the truth of the matter is you're just feeling nasty. The problem is we tend to take it out on people. So here's my suggestion for bad days. If you've been feeling grumpy during the day or for a day or two and you can't associate with anything in particular, maybe it's just a bad day. You have a perfect right to a bad day. But you have no right to blame anyone. It's nobody's fault. If everything in your life was perfect and you had all the money you think you wanted and everybody loved you and, an angel came down to your bedside every morning and said, here's a list of what you're supposed to do today, and you had no doubt about how to live your life, you'd still have bad days. Every great spiritual and religious leader has had bad days. Everybody has bad days. So don't blame anyone. That's rule one. But you're entitled to it. Go for it. Have it. But let people know. I have a little button that I haven't had to wear for quite a long time that a member of my staff gave me some time ago. Said, wear this when you're having a bad day so we'll know. Okay? It's a little red button with white letters, says, back off, fish breath. And when I was having a bad day, I'd wear it. It would remind me that this is just a bad day. It's not the end of the world. And it would let the people I'm working with know, look, I'm going to be screaming and hollering today. Just live with it, all right? I'll live with yours. You live with mine. I'm just feeling grumpy today. So you got an option. Go ahead and have it, but you can't blame anybody. If you don't want to have a bad day, most of the people I have talked to, the exercises we've been doing, you can just step into a secret little alcove somewhere where nobody can see you and run through the physical exercises. the stand, breathe, and smile, the howl for joy, the shaken face. Just try doing the physical exercises and see what happens to your bad day. You can blow it right out of the water if you choose to, by your own actions. A lot more serious than a bad day is what I call the blues. In psychology, it's called situational adjustment to loss in adult life. It's loss-related, and we're all going to lose things. You get the blues when you're in a relationship and it breaks up. You've lost that relationship. You get the blues. You feel bad. That's normal. You're supposed to feel bad. Maybe you move from one town to another and you've lost a whole set of friends. You've got to start all over again. You get the blues. You feel down for a while. Sometimes it can be more serious. You can wake up in the middle of the night staring at the ceiling, and the question occurs to you, is this really what I wanted to do with my life? Do I really care about this? And you start to lose hope and lose faith, and you lose touch with the dream. And that's a serious case of the blues. It's loss related to other than death. The trick about the blues is this. There's no way you're going to avoid those loss experiences. So you have to cope with them, but first you have to identify that's what's going on. I want to give you a mechanism for coping with the blues that works for most people. It's certainly worth trying. You're going along in your life and you have a drop-off experience like this, and then you level off. Maybe even start to recover a little bit, but guess what? You're going to have more than one loss experience in the course of your life. And if you don't learn how to cope with it, it can become a far more serious condition. I'm going to give you a three-step mechanism just to try. When you have some loss experience in your life, now I am not talking about the loss to death of someone you love. That's a different experience we'll deal with in a moment. A job loss, a relationship loss, friends, dreams. I want you to try. Number one, I want you to write it down. I want you to put it on a piece of paper. I want you to stop and think, I've been feeling pretty rotten for a long time. Maybe I've lost something and I haven't really wanted to look at it. So you sit down and you think about, have I lost something? And if you identify that you have lost something, and that's what's attached to your feeling bad, and sometimes it's obvious and sometimes you have to think about it a little more, I don't want you to just think about it. I want you to write down, this is what I lost. This is how I feel. This is why I feel that way. Write it down. The second thing I want you to do is tell somebody about it. Now, I don't mean tell everybody. I don't mean you take your piece of paper with all the rotten things that happened to you and you go to the workplace and you say, everybody come here, look what happened to me. It's the worst thing that ever happened in my life. Hopefully you have a friend or a spouse or a rabbi or a minister or a priest or someone that you can talk to where you don't have to be super person. Somewhere you can say, I've failed and I've really blown it here. Someone you can talk to and share those things. Pick a person and tell them about it. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to give you an answer. You just have to name the monster. It's real important to name the monster. So you think about it, you write it down, you take that piece of paper to somebody, you tell them about that experience. And then you do the hardest thing. You take some kind of action. And one of the things that happens when you have this drop-off experience, your perspective becomes focused on that loss. And you start thinking about all the other losses you've had and probably all the other losses you're going to have and all the losses that are going on in the world. And you turn on the news and all it is lost this, lost that, lost money, lost friends, lost a country. My God, everybody's losing. And you get focused on loss, 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 and you get locked into that fight or flight response. So in order to kick out of it, what you've got to do is remind yourself, it goes back to perspective. You have to be willing to access joy even in adversity. So what I suggest to you is that you pull out the joy list we talked about earlier. Hopefully you've made one. And you look at it. And maybe on the list it says, one of the things that enhances my sense of joy in being alive is calling these friends that I never have time to talk to. So you sit down and you call one of them and you talk to them and you feel a little better for a while, but as soon as you hang up, you feel bad again. Because this is the blues. Serious stuff doesn't go away. So then I look at my list again, and of course fishing is on my list. So maybe I'll go down to the river after work one day and I'll fish for 20 minutes. That's all, 20 minutes. And it makes me feel a little better, and then on my way home I feel bad again. So I'll stop by the stationery store and I'll go through the humor cards. Sometimes, to entertain myself, all I have to do is walk in the door of that store in my town and look at the look on the people's face when they see me come in. Going, oh, he's going to rifle through all the cards again. And that amuses me for a minute, and that's all I need, and I turn around and I walk out. Maybe I'll go over to the hospital and I'll spend some time with one of the clients that I'm working with. I will shift my perspective and start paying attention to what I can do for somebody else. I don't like to do that. It's not a natural thing when I have my own misery and trouble to focus on and think about and tell you about. It is not natural for me. For me, it might be for some of you, it is not natural for me to seek someone else to help while I'm in that situation. But if I train myself and work at it and discipline myself enough, it will occur to me. That makes me feel good, usually for quite a while, and then it'll drop off. The point is, if during that period of loss, you make an effort to seek out those experiences that enhance and nourish and remind you that you have a sense of joy, by the time you come out of it, you're about where you went into it. You don't end up in a continuing series of drop-offs. Grief is a unique human experience, a loss to death. And even in that experience, I think there is a place for what we have defined as humor. And sometimes you can have grief experiences for 40 years. If you don't know how to grieve, if you don't know how to process the loss to death of someone you cared about, you can grieve for the rest of your life. And humor, in my mind, fits in this way. I have dealt with a lot of death and dying. And the most successful bereavements are the ones that somewhere along the way, maybe a year or 10 later, include the person sitting down and talking to someone else about the joy or the celebration of that person. Sharing the moments that were good. Telling another human being about the laughter and the lightheartedness. About the play and the good. Celebrating that the life existed, rather than continually focusing on the fact that it is gone. I had a woman tell me a story one time that I will share with you because I think it illustrates the point. She came up to me after a workshop, and I used to tell a story about this. She said, "That story you told about grieving, was that a lie?" I said, no, well, not exactly. She said, "What?" I said, "Well, you know, it's kind of part of a story I heard and part of something that happened to me and part of something somebody else told me." She said, "Like a lie?" I said, yeah, like a lie, yeah. She said, "Well, I'm going to give you this story and you use it because it's a much better story and it's true." So I'll share it. When she was younger, she was about 70 when she told me this story. When she was younger, they had 3 children, 12, 13, and 14 years old. Her husband got sick and died very suddenly, very abruptly. In fact, she went to the hospital one night. He'd gone in with these pains. They couldn't find out what it was. And it was tough on them because they were a very close family. She said, "We were so close, we voted on everything." And I mean, we voted on what to have for dessert on the weekends. We voted on what radio shows to listen to. That'll tell you how long ago this story was. We voted on where to go on vacation. We voted on who would do the work around the house. She said we weren't stupid. When the 3rd child was born, my husband and I decided we have 2 votes each because we need to maintain a little control here. She said, but sometimes he'd side with one of the kids, you know. But that's how we got them involved in the decision-making process. We were a very close-knit family. I went to the hospital one night. I walked in. The doctor said he was going to come home the next morning. I went in to talk to him, and he handed me an envelope. He said, "Honey, if anything happens to me, open this envelope." She said, "What are you talking about?" The doctor said, "You're fine. They couldn't find anything wrong." He said, "Just humor me. Take this, okay? If anything happens to me, then you open it." She said, "Okay." She got a call at 3:30 in the morning. He died in the middle of the night. It was a crushing blow to the family for a lot of reasons. One was, this was at a time, as she explained to me, women did not just go out and get a job. She was a homemaker, and she considered that a career, and she was real good at it. But her husband had been the main means of financial support. And now that he was gone, it meant they were going to have to split the family up, and the kids were going to have to live with different relatives. And that was tough. And at the funeral, as everybody had left, they knew they had to have this conversation about where did the kids want to live, and they had to have it pretty soon because she only had about a week's money to keep them going. Her daughter turned to her and said, "Gee, Mom, it's too bad we have to split up the family now because this means we outvote you." And she said, "I almost hit the kid." And then it suddenly occurred to me she was just trying to let off a little of the pain that she was feeling. And I remembered something that my husband had put in the envelope, and I pulled it out and handed it to the kids. And on it, this man had written, "My last will and testament, to my wife I leave my 2 votes." And she said when the kids saw that, they started laughing. And then we started crying, and we laughed, and we cried, and we laughed, and we cried. She said the funeral director walked in and said, "Excuse me, this is a funeral parlor." And she said, I got off my chair and I backed that man up against the wall and I said, don't you dare tell me I do not have the right to remember my husband and laugh. She said, it's been very difficult. It's going to get a lot tougher. He was a wonderful person and we're sharing that. And if we want to laugh, we'll laugh, and we've paid for this room for another 40 minutes. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, I understand you're grieving. Pardon me, excuse me, pardon me, pardon me. That experience led those people to decide they were going to use the week they had left not to think about where they were going to live, but how to keep the family together. And they came up with a solution to that. Every one of us has had losses, some of them very recent. It is one of the most critical learning elements in our life, dealing with that death and dying process, and we're not very well prepared for it in this country. But I know for a fact that even in grief, there is a place for what we have called humor. That sense of perspective and that sense of joy in being alive, that somehow, somewhere, you have to stop and talk to another person about the good of the life that happened and share those things as well. And that's very difficult. I had members of my family die that I did not like very much. People that I had always perceived were part of my problem. And celebrating their life did not prove easy. We had to find ways to do it. And one of the ways I'll never forget was someone said, I said, I cannot talk about anything good this person did because this person made my life miserable, thank you very much. And there's nothing to celebrate. And they said, well, this person acted like this, didn't they? And I said, yes, they did. And they said, are you going to act like that? And I said, I certainly am not. And they said, then why don't you thank that person for teaching you how not to act? I said, okay, you win, we'll celebrate. Sometimes it's that tricky, but it's got to be done. And then we have the HH. I want to bring this up because it's very important. We talk about the absence of humor. Why do they call it happy hour? Have you ever thought of that? First of all, it is never an hour. You ever seen it be an hour? It's not an hour. Happy hour, 7 to midnight. What are they talking about? And it's not happy hour, it's booze hour. Let's call it what it is. It's not happy hour. You don't go in, they got comedians there and clowns and jugglers and well, they do have clowns in some of them, that's true. But the idea I'm bringing up is this. The culture very strongly supports that alcohol and drugs are a great way to feel good. And for a lot of people, they are. I have absolutely nothing against alcohol and drugs. Alcohol and drugs aren't the problem. Why people want to use them is the problem, and we hardly ever look at that. They're not the problem. They're just sitting there, growing there, doing those things, you know. Some people can drink and do it very well. Never get drunk, never hurt anybody, don't have terrible personality changes. I got nothing against drugs and alcohol. I've got friends who think that fire was probably created because the human race wanted to ferment something. I know a lot of people who drink very successfully. No, I got nothing against alcohol and drugs. But I want to share with you one of the primary absence experiences in our culture around humor right now involves alcohol and drugs. And it's a real dear issue to me because I got nothing against the substances. I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and what that means is that I drank and drugged for a great many years as a way of dealing with what I thought were the stresses and tensions of my life. And people took to telling me I had a great problem with drinking. And when people told me I had a problem with drinking, I'd say, yes, and you're it, so why don't you leave? Because the classic addict that I was, it never occurred to me that you wouldn't drink just like I did if you had my problems. If you had my problems, you'd drink too. I was very careful. I knew I had blackouts, so I was always sure I was someplace I wouldn't get hurt. You know, I had it all figured out. And then I kind of figured out, as my life degenerated toward the end of that cycle, that I had a sort of allergy to drugs and alcohol, which is a way of saying that whenever I drank, I broke out in rashes of stupid behavior. I did things I wouldn't do sober. And I began to get real concerned. And so I decided to quit. And I found out I couldn't. Oh, I could quit for a week, a month, even a year. But the next time I took a drink thinking I was cured, I was as soused as I'd been the day I'd stopped. And it got real scary. And I lost everything. Now, I finally found a group of people who helped me learn how to deal with that issue. I bring it up not because I'm here to preach about it at all, because that's your decision. But about 10 to 12% of any audience I talk to is going to be practicing or hopefully recovering alcoholics. And you're there, and you know who you are because you're thinking, I wish he wouldn't talk about this. Or you're thinking, well, certainly everybody has blackouts, don't they? No, 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 no. Normal drinkers do not have more than maybe one. And then they say, hey, I don't like that, not going to do that again, and they don't. Alcoholics go, well, if I'm going to have a blackout, I better stay home so I don't hurt myself. They figure it out. We have strange turns of mind when we're addicted. Things like I used to walk up and down the airplane aisle when they gave out those little bottles of wine. Remember those? They used to hand those out. And I'd see somebody hadn't had theirs to drink, and I'd go, excuse me, my friend didn't get his. Could I borrow it? Thank you very much. And I would go back to my seat with 8, 10 of those little bottles, and I thought that was normal. No, no. I would have radical personality changes when I drank, another indication of alcoholic behavior. But it never occurred to me that life without alcohol and drugs was even possible, so I didn't consider it. I bring it up only for this reason. If you're an untreated alcoholic or addict, your capacity to develop these humor skills is nil, zero, gone, zip. Because the consumption of alcohol and drugs, if you're an alcoholic or an addict, totally deforms the pleasure centers in the brain ability to distinguish between a variety of goods. And pretty soon the only good it can focus on is that substance, and then even that substance doesn't bring relief, but then you're addicted to it. And it's a real hellish cycle. I bring it up because the culture so strongly supports. Look at those ads. I love those ads. Don't you love those ads? The ads where all the healthy young people are having a beer at the river and playing and having fun and being healthy. Where's the big pot-bellied guy throwing up in the corner in those ads? A lot more common experience here. So I just bring it up so that maybe there's somebody out there and they need the trigger pulled, and maybe that'll do it. I'll tell you 2 other things about addiction and alcoholism. If you are an addict or an alcoholic and you get sober, you will not necessarily end up like me, okay? That'd stop a lot of people from trying. I'd rather be drunk than short and bald and funny looking. And the freedom that is on the other side is remarkable. I am probably crazier now than I ever was when I drank, and in a very positive way. The main differences are, I know I'm going to remember today tomorrow, so I'm a lot careful with the day than I used to be. And I'm a whole lot more concerned with what kind of joy I can create than what kind of stuff I can get for me. Just to wrap off this absence of humor experience, dysthymia comes from 2 Latin root words which mean painful soul. Dysthymics are people who have a broken belief system. There's nothing basically biochemically wrong with them, but they have a broken belief system. They truly believe that the world is a hideous place, and they may have reason to believe that. They may have had some very horrible experiences at an early age or even in adult life that shaped their view of the world. But dysthymics are very hard people to work with, to live with, to love, and to care for. Because the more you do to try and bring them around, the more it convinces them that they're right. See, dysthymics are hard to treat because they don't think there's anything wrong with them. They think there's something wrong with you. Well, you wouldn't be laughing if you understood how serious the world situation is. You know, the ozone is depleting and the dolphins are dying and the Soviets are right around the corner. And they can itinerate 500 things that are wrong with the world. That's easy. That's simple. But the important thing to understand about dysthymia is this. If you don't learn how to deal with bad days, if you don't learn how to identify and share and take action when you've got the blues, if you don't learn how to process grief, if you have a problem with alcohol or drug addiction, the likelihood that you'll become dysthymic is very great. Because without those developed tools to meet the difficulties that you're going to run into, that's what leads to dysthymia, is an absence of the ability to cope with trauma, difficulty, and pain.